Thanks for being with us, especially if you're here for the first time. Again, my name is Dominic, and I wanted to just say welcome again if you trickled in a bit late because of the race. I'm just going to steal a stool here. Steal it. There you go. And I just want to encourage many of you, maybe if you're kind of trying to make sense of church in a new way, you probably got a feel of what we're about and what we're trying to do. And this morning, we're following up in a series that we've been looking at, and the series is called, probably the two most powerful words that we feel as humans in life is now what? What awaits us? What's going to happen next? If you're having a baby, well, now what does that mean? Or if you're getting a new job, or this is the season for, are you going to get the board, buddy? You just move it here, yeah. Do some teaching today? Some of you are like, we're gonna learn. This is one of the churches that learns. Anyway, thanks, Mateo. Bro, you're having another baby.
Yes.
What the heck? Okay. What's going on? Some of you maybe know, this is the season of graduation. People are graduating, and so for students, it's now what? Am I going to get a job? What do I do next? All kinds of different things. There's now what moments in life are meant to help us to focus on God in new ways. And one of the most powerful things about this now what seasons in our lives is that oftentimes we feel like we don't know what to do. We feel afraid, we feel overwhelmed, and it can feel a weird place to be in, especially in a culture that teaches us that we should know what to do almost all the time. We should know the answer, we should know what's next, and we have to plan things. And actually, God uses these now what moments to remind us that if He's not with us, we actually are in trouble in those now what moments. And I often think about this in life in different times, and one of the joys of my job and what I get to do is I get to be with couples a lot, especially as they prepare to get married. Oftentimes I'm with couples as they're preparing for marriage, and I don't know if some of you are, how many of you have a lot of weddings this season already, and you're like, wow, I hate love. Any of you? No, that moment? Some of you, right. You're like, it's going to be so expensive. I got to sell one of my kids to do this. How am I going to do all this wedding stuff? But if you're at a wedding, just pay attention to this. There's something at weddings that's very, very powerful, and obviously the wedding celebration is a great thing. But there's a moment in every wedding where the minister, the person who's leading the ceremony, asks the couple, now do you, blank, take this person to be your wife or your husband? And everybody knows what the next comment is supposed to be. Everybody knows what the person has to say. And as the minister, you're always thinking about when you got married. That was your moment. Do you take Billy Bob? And some of you are thinking about it right now, and you're sad. No, I'm kidding. You're like, I did that. But I want to explain something that's really, really important. In that moment, the couple that's getting married have to say what? I do, right? I do take this person. I do. Now, if they don't say I do, everything else that's been prepared, everything else that's been planned stops right there, full stop. It's never happened to me, and I hope it never does, but to be in that moment to say, hey, do you take so-and-so to marry? And they say, I do not. I think everybody who's paid money, who's bought a dress and a suit, you're like, did they say no to what? The whole world stops. And I want you to understand this moment as kind of a funny moment because it's similar to how Christians are learning to follow Jesus in the Bible. I want you to understand that in the Bible, when people are realizing that this Jesus who's dead is alive, which is Easter, we celebrate the resurrection, the minute they understand that He's alive, He comes to people and He says, so now that you know that I'm alive, and now that you know that because I'm alive, you can live life in a new way, now that you know that, do you say I do to the things that I have in store for you? Are you ready for this? Are you ready for the now what moments of what it means that you have to courageously learn to follow me now? Are you ready to do that? Now, if a lot of people, you think of it that way, when you say, I do, Jesus, I do understand that. It unlocks this whole new adventure, this whole new season of following Jesus and understanding what it means that He loves us and experiencing life in a new way. Or you say, I don't. And in that moment, everything stops. No matter what's in store, no matter what God has in store, no matter what plans or things God wanted to use you to accomplish or to teach you, everything changes. And in some ways, we've been learning in this series about what it means that the earliest Christians say I do to Jesus, say yes, we want that, and yet are going to have to learn how hard it is to work towards what this means. And so today I want to talk about an important idea, and Joanna, when she shared, she kind of really nailed part of the idea that I want to talk to you about this morning, and it's this idea of worship. This idea that one of the hardest things that followers of Jesus have to do in the Bible and today, this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life, okay? You're going to have to learn how to worship. how to let Jesus be the center of everything that you are. It's something we have to learn. Now, I'll frame it this way for you. Maybe this will help you understand. If I told you that I wanted to learn how to cook, what would you say to me? Just think about it. How many of you say, like, you could do a class, right? Or you can find a chef, right? And they'll teach you. Or just start working at a restaurant. Maybe you might learn. How many of you, right? Now, if I asked you, I want to learn how to ride a bike, what would you say? You should buy a bike, right? Find somebody who can help you, right? All those kinds of things. Now, if I told you I want to learn how to worship, what would you tell me? Bingo! This girl raised right now. She's not on staff. No, it's hard. There's some things that it's like, I don't really know how to give you that, because we live in a culture where some things it's very clear how to learn them, and other things we're like, how would we learn that? Now, I'll tell you why this is so hard to understand sometimes. Because blue, right? Let's do this. Or ship. Okay? I'll tell you why this is so hard to understand. Because in our culture, we live in a time when we have to learn something, we often look for a specialist who knows how to do it, and then we follow them, and that just makes sense, right? But worship, or things like worship, or how do you learn how to love? Like, you can't just do that with one person who's just going to show you. You actually have to do it in the context of life. You have to start to practice it and live it out. And so oftentimes when people see the word worship, all kinds of ideas come to mind. Like if we did a survey, when I say worship, what do you think of? We probably have like 100 different answers. How many of you would say like singing songs, a form of worship? Yeah, right? Makes sense. How many of you would say giving of yourself? Makes sense, right? All these kinds of things. So because it's so confusing, I want to help you understand worship in a different way this morning. And I want to give you a different way to understand what this word means, because the most simple way to understand this word is what you give worth to. Okay? Things that you give worth to, you end up worshiping. Now, in the Bible, this is such an important thing, because the things that we worship, the things we give our attention to, they start to direct how we make decisions in life, how we live our life, how we decide. So I want to give you another way to understand this word worship. Instead of what we give worth to, I want you to think of worship as the things you're willing to sacrifice the most for. So just if I were to ask you, I'm gonna pretend like I know you, and I'm going to pretend that if I asked you this question, this is what you'd say. You'd say that the order of worship in your life is God, whatever that is. I try to worship God first. Then how many of you would say like family? Family, yeah, somebody, family. What would you put after that? Huh? Others. And that means like work. You give worth to work, and there's all kinds of other things, right? And so think of your life, think of this week, okay? Whatever you did this week, just think about these quadrants, because all of you found a way. Which of these things did you sacrifice the most for this week? You have to tell me. Put your hand up. The things you sacrifice the most for are the things that are going to orient your heart towards worshiping them. Now, I know sometimes this happens to me. I sacrifice the most for my family. Or I have seasons in my life where I sacrifice the most for my work. I just commit myself to that, and it helps you understand that the things you're willing to sacrifice the most for are the things that your heart is learning how to worship. Okay? So one of the things that the earliest Christians have to learn in the Bible is how do they make Jesus the center of their worship in a way that they never had to before. Now they follow Jesus, they love Jesus, but now that he's alive, he has to be the center of everything that they do. They have to learn what it means to, any of you ever remember seeing those bracelets that people used to have, like, what would Jesus do bracelets? Super corny, but in some ways there's something really powerful about being in moments and thinking, if Jesus was here now with me, holding my hand, how would he respond to this situation? What would he have me do in this moment? Now, when things are simple, that's easy, you kind of know. But when there's a crisis or a struggle or something's difficult, you often are like, I'm not sure. Like I had a moment this week, I was talking to my kids and they were telling me something about school, and I was like, I'm not really sure what to say right now. Like I'm not sure, and I thought, what would it look like for me to help my kids understand that Jesus can help them with this? What would that look like? When we do that naturally, when that flows out of us and we're learning how to do that, we're learning how to worship. We're learning how to order these things in the right way. Now, the early Christians in the Bible, they, after the resurrection, realize that the God of Israel who they worshiped is the same as who Jesus is, and now they have to start to focus their attention on speaking and singing and celebrating the greatness of who Jesus is as God. So guess one of the first things we realized that Christians did? I tell you, you'll maybe know. What's one of the first things that helped them learn how to worship? Many of them couldn't read. They didn't have a Bible yet. Guess what? They wrote songs. That's why music is so important in Christianity. Because you know with your kids, like one of my good friends, his name is Dave, he helps with our worship team here, and he often used to say this joke, he's not here today, he often say this joke to me. Dave would also say, Dom, if math was in a song, I'd be a mathematician. How many of you have kids or there's moments, if you can sing something, you just kind of learn it. You're like, how do I know that? I just sang it and I knew it all. In the Bible, one of the most powerful ways that people learn how to worship is that they sang about the greatness of who Jesus was. That is, by the way, why we sing today. Because we're learning how to orient our thinking and our words around this idea of who Jesus is. Now, if you came to church next Sunday and we were singing a song and we were singing about you, wouldn't you think that was weird? Wouldn't you be like, hey, are they singing about Dom? Oh, yeah, it's not that bad. I like this. No. You'd know right away there's something wrong. Like, why are they singing my name? Now, in the ancient world, it would have been really, really weird for people to walk into a gathering and to hear people singing a song with the name Jesus in it. They would have been like, why are you singing about the guy who's dead? Like, why are you singing about the guy that we got rid of that was annoying? They're like, because he's not dead. He's alive. Now, we take that for granted. We're like, let's write a song about the heart of worship. Let's just hug and say, like, let's sing that. But one of the earliest things that the Christians who are following Jesus are learning, they're learning that now what means that they have to learn to worship in a new way. That God is teaching them the next steps that they don't always see, they don't always know, which is part of life. We don't always know what the next step is. There's this beautiful passage in the Old Testament about how God guides people, and you can see it behind me. You can go up to the screen, the next verse. Yeah, here it is, Proverbs. It says this, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Any of you ever heard this before? Any of you read this and you're like, I think I know this passage? And when I was really, really, really young, I read this passage, and I really read it in the wrong way. I read it in such a way that because the Lord determines my steps, I don't need plans. This is the teenage translation of this passage. If you're a teenager, that's how you read this passage. They're like, oh, because the Lord determines things, then my plans are useless. That's not what it says. It actually says that we, as humans, are meant to make plans. Like, plan things. Organize yourself. God gave you a brain and emotions and feelings and passions. So you make decisions. But in those moments, surrender all of that to the direction of how God might use it or change it. Be open to that. This week, what are some plans that you're holding before God? And how might God be saying to you, hey, I need you to surrender some of this to me now. I need you to trust that you've made plans and you have some ideas and you may be thinking about a relationship or you're thinking about a job, you're thinking about your parents, you're thinking all of it. You've made plans, it's beautiful. Plans are important. But now, God is going to help you to learn how to leave that with Him. When we do that, we're learning how to, guess what? To worship. We're learning how to worship. We're saying, God, we want our plans and our lives, that of our kids and our grandchildren and the church and my work, we want them to be shaped by you being at the center of all of it so that this doesn't get out of order. Okay? Now, if you think about it, how does God determine our steps? How does God decide what your steps should be? How does God decide what my steps should be? Don't you wish we could find some secret manual that would tell us how God determines the steps of people? Now, I'm going to tell you a secret, that we actually do know how God determines the steps of people. We know that God determines our steps in such a way where we're learning how to worship Him more. God will always let our steps follow in such a way where we're paying attention to what we worship. That's it. So if you find yourself in a situation and you say this, like I say, like, how did I even get here? Like, how did this even happen? Almost every Sunday morning when I get up before church and I get up and I get ready, I say that to myself. How did this happen? How did we even get here? Just a few years ago, I was living in Ontario and things were different, and now we're here, and I'm like, wow. And then there's a race and people, and I mean, how did this happen? And I'm learning in life, maybe God is going to show you this in your life, that our paths and our steps are determined by God in such a way not to trick us, not to surprise us, not to get us, I made bad stuff happen. It's not, none of that. God's determining our steps in such a way to teach us about what we give highest worth to, right? And the Christians in the Bible are learning how to do this. They're learning how to trust one another. They're learning how to worship. Now, I want to tell you one of the biggest temptations that you and I are going to face in our whole lives as Christians. We're going to believe that lie that somehow we just learn how to worship on our own. We just learn how to do it and it magically happens and I hope I get it. That's not how life works. Worship is one of those things that the Bible invites us that has to get formed in us. And the beautiful picture in the Bible for this is how a potter takes some clay and over a while just molds the clay and heats up the clay and spins the clay and breaks a part of the clay off. This image of a potter just forming us. It's the beautiful image of God. And that can be very, very painful sometimes. And it can be overwhelming sometimes. But I want to read for you just one section of the Bible in this book of Acts, where we learn and we see how the earliest followers of Jesus, they were learning how to worship properly, how to set their hearts on the right kinds of things, how to make sure their direction was not led by every challenge that happened in life. You know, you ever have this happen to you in your life where you get up and if the weather's bad, you feel sad? Right? Or if you know you have a bad meeting, then you're like, oh, I'm kind of like stressed. Or if you had a good day, you're really, really happy. And if you have a bad day, then you're really, really sad. You almost feel like you're, oh my goodness, like, I tell my wife sometimes, I'm like, I feel bipolar, like, and there's a real bipolar thing, I'm not kidding that, but the way we have language that we use, I just don't know, because sometimes we let all the things that are happening around us dictate the kind of people we're going to become. And worship is that thing where God takes our hearts and orients them in a way where He holds the center of what's happening. And no matter what happens around us, no matter what's going around, we can say, hey, I'm going to come back to this place, which this song was about, this heart of worship, of having God at the center. Now, what are some things that are going to happen over the next few weeks in your life that are prone to make you disoriented in life? I can think of two things in my life that are going to happen over the summer that I'm prone to be disoriented about. And as we get closer to those things, I'm really trying to pay attention to this question of God. I'm learning to worship you inside. And I'm learning to hold very, very clearly that I sacrifice most for my relationship with you, and you're going to help me with those things that I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed about, that I'm not sure about. What are those things for you? Now, in the Bible, there's this beautiful passage. I'm not going to take a long time, and if you don't have a Bible, we'd love to help you. We can give you one and teach you how to read it. We've been doing a Bible study at the church here on Tuesdays. You're welcome to come to that. There's this book called the Book of Acts, and here's one of the passages in the Bible that we're told about how the early Christians start to orient their idea of worship around who Jesus is. And I'm going to put this down so you can kind of see it better. It says this in the book of Acts. You see it behind me? There we go. They devoted themselves, these followers of Jesus, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. This is one of the earliest passages that we have of how people in the Bible are learning to now worship Jesus as the center of their lives around these four very, very simple things, these four ideas. Now, growing up, you know, I went to different kinds of churches, and if I were to ask you, you know, what is church for? Why do you go to church? You know, a lot of people would be like, to learn, right? I mean, you'd say, I hope I can learn at church, right? And then what happened is the internet was invented, and people realized, I can learn without going to church, so I'm not going anymore. And after a while, people just realized, so then what is church for? Well, to hang out. Okay, well, I can hang out with people that are not at church, so I'm going to do that. And over time, the meaning of people gathering to worship, guess what happened? Slowly, it started to break away, break down, fall apart. And we have a whole generation of people that now wonder, like, why do people even go to church? Like, let me get this straight. All of you right here, hey, Facebook Live people in your pajama, all of you right here could have stayed home and slept in, and you came here? Wow, it's ridiculous. We're going to need to learn together what it means that when we gather together as the church, this is the space where we're learning how to worship together. And these are the four ingredients that are there in blue, if you see them on the screen. They're the four ways that God oriented the earliest followers of Jesus around the worship of Jesus as King in their lives. And if you've never heard this before and you've never understood this before, I want to frame for you these four things in four promises that God makes to us as Christians. Four promises that God invites us to enter into that are available to us if we trust them. If we're willing in our now what moment to step and say, God, I would love for you to show me a new way of following you, a new way of understanding who you are. Now, have you ever met somebody who can't keep their promises? Anyone? You know the pain of telling someone, hey, you're going to do that? Yeah, I'm going to do that. And then they don't do it? You're like, unfriend. No, okay. We know the feeling of living in a world where promises are just quickly said and they don't mean anything. Broken relationships, broken work environments. We have all kinds of laws put in place to try to make people pay when they break their promises. So it's going to be very hard for us to trust the promises of the Bible when we live in a world where nobody keeps their promises. In the church, when we learn to worship, we remind ourselves that God is the God who keeps his promises. That's what he is. And we need regular times when we gather to say, oh, God kept his promise when I prayed for this. God kept his promise and I'm learning to trust God. And when we gather together, we're learning what that means for worship to shape who we are. So I want to frame these 4 things for you in 4 promises. I'm going to have them on the screen for you so you can see them. And they're right here. Super, super easy. Because we're going to be done and then we'll kick you out. Okay? But I want you to feel this. Take a picture. I'll send it to you, whatever. These 4 things that shape worship come with 4 promises that God gives to us as Christians. There are 4 promises that shape everything that we become. And they're very, very simple. One is the promise of purpose. That in the apostles' teachings, which become the scriptures, there's the promise that God has a purpose not only for them, but for us. That he takes normal people, like me and you, fishermen, fisherwomen, whatever, and he says, I have purposes for you, and I'm going to shape your life around these purposes. And these purposes are going to shape who you become and how people see me in you when you sit under the teachings of what it means to be my follower. Okay? Very, very simple. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. Now, if you're taking notes, I was going to write this. I'll do it with a little symbol so you can see it. I'm not going to put it back up. Apostles' teaching. Okay? Simple. Apostles' teaching. The teachings of the apostles will inform every single one of the other 3. It's important to understand that. That the teachings of the apostle are going to inform what the fellowship looks like, what breaking of bread means, and what prayer means. So see them as like, these teachings now are going to shape how we do these other things. Now, this is hard for us to understand because we never think about how are you going to learn to worship Jesus as King? How will you learn that? You're not going to get up tomorrow and magically do it. You're going to have to get in an environment where these 4 things, as they've always been for Christians, are shaping how you understand who you are and what God has in store for you. The second one is this idea of fellowship. Now, I hate that word, okay? Because when I hear the word fellowship, okay, it's an English word that's translated, I hear like a country club, okay? I hear people are like, well, I have a card and I'm a member here. And over the years, my experience of church is that people saw church as that. We hang out with people like us. We hang out, we're insiders and you're an outsider, and almost like on a golf membership. Like important people go there, but we're like, we don't have that. The word fellowship means something so much more beautiful in the Bible and the actual Greek word. And I want to give you an idea for it. The word fellowship for the earliest followers of Jesus who are gathering together like this to worship means that we gather with others who see all of our vulnerabilities and our weaknesses and our struggles as not something bad, but as something that God is present in with us. Okay? This is a totally different idea of what it means to be in a club. Church is not a membership club. It never has been. It looks that way in our culture because it's like a gathering. But here's one of the ways that the church Christians had to learn to worship that they never had to before. They would end up finding themselves with people who are so different than them, sitting next to them in a gathering together. Think about how weird that would be. Like being with other people that your whole life you've been taught that they're different, they're annoying, they smell weird, we don't like their music, all that stuff. The word for it is racist, okay? So you just need one. All these things. Think about it, we live in a culture where that's still going on thousands of years later. You know how Jesus solves that problem? By people who are learning how to worship him first. And in those moments when we fellowship together, when we gather, when we just don't, we don't just stay at a distance, but we get close and we learn and we listen. And, I hear someone's story and I'm like, wow. How many times I've sat with somebody and they've shared something about their story and they start to cry and I'm like, wow. The weight that you're carrying or the struggle. Or they'll say like, I've never told this to anyone for 20 years. I'm like, wow. It's part of like the fellowship culture of this community. It's really hard to do. You know why fellowship is so hard to do? Because you and me have to agree to be vulnerable. How many of you are good at being vulnerable? No, we don't sign up for that. It's hard to be like, and I don't mean just vulnerable in the sense you're able to talk. You're vulnerable where you take instruction. Where you can say, hey, I'm broken and I'm hurting and I need you to help me. I need you to show me something about myself that I don't see. You know what that's called in the world? It's to be self-aware. In Christianity, it's called to learn how to worship Jesus. Because in Christianity, Jesus is the only one who teaches us how to really be ourselves. We don't just learn it by reading some book on self-awareness. We learn it by learning how to worship. And in the ancient world, scholars have done more and more studies on this than you can read. But I want to tell you one word that ends up being one of the most powerful characteristics of the early Christians in an ancient Roman Empire. And maybe you've heard of it before, maybe you know this, and I want to show you with a picture. You can go to the picture of the wall. This is a wall that is kind of a monument in ancient Rome where the emperors of Rome, when they accomplished great feats of conquering and destroying other nations, they would make note of this. And one emperor in particular would write about the greatness of the emperors. And they would do this to show other people that God's divine power was with these emperors, the gods. That the emperors were not just men, they were like gods. And there's a wall with the inscription of the achievements of the divine Augustus. Augustus is a term for emperor, great one. We get the title of our month, August, from that name, okay? And so there's this wall of this. And in the ancient world, one of the great signs that God was with people is that they were victorious and they won battles, right? That they could win, that they could conquer, that they were hustlers, that they, all of these things that still very much are in our culture, right? And in the midst of that world, one of the greatest characteristics of those who are learning how to worship Jesus is that they are humble. That they humbly ask for help. That they humbly share a weakness. That in humility, they say, hey, if you don't help me with this, I'm not going to make it. If you don't help me figure this out, I don't really know what we're going to do. That one of the earliest characteristics of Christians was that they're humble. Are you humble? Is there times in your life where God has said to you, hey, you need to practice humility here? If you struggle with that, and I've struggled with that, one of the best ways to learn how to practice the humility of God in our lives is just learn to listen to someone else. This is one of the biggest things I've tried to learn as a dad. It's a huge, huge thing. Because, as parents, we go from these phases with our kids where our kids think we know everything. And that's a good thing, by the way. Until, they're 4, and then they realize we don't know anything. And so there's these moments. And so one of the things that I really have realized in my own life is that it's really powerful for me to say to my kids, Dad doesn't know. I really don't know. And oftentimes when they're doing something that they love, this is very, very common in our home. I try this. I don't do it all the time well, but I try. So think about this in your context. They'll say something to me about something that they're learning at school. They're like, hey, Dad, we learned this, and we're learning all this stuff. And they're excited about it. So I'll say, I've never heard of this. Would you be open to telling Dad about that? I'm trying to model for them what it means that I'm listening in a way that's humble. Now, the word humility, even in our language, we get the word hummus from it. Hummus. How many of you are getting hungry? A bit? Yeah. It means from the ground, from the dirt. Meaning that when someone's humble, they're always reminded of their place, that they're close to the ground. Right? There's the image of the word is humble. And there's something about kids, when you're with them, that they're learning and they're asking questions and they're trying to work this out. That the fellowship of the earliest Christians, this fellowship was not just some country club where people hung out and it was special and we're in, we're out. No. It was this growing community of rich people and poor people, Jews and Gentiles. I've said this before, in Quebec, Francophones and Anglophones and other cultures, where they sit together and they're like, you know what? We're going to need your help. We're going to need to learn from you. You're here because God has a purpose for you, and we're going to do this together. In a world where everybody, just like they did in the ancient world, pride power, strength, those who win, those who succeed, those who can get ahead, those who hustle, those who make the most money. There's this community of people that are worshiping Jesus, and they're saying, we're just learning how to be humble. Now, don't confuse humility with being like someone who people walk over. Or being used, oh, woe is me, you have those people. Oh, I'm just a Christian, I just let people do it. The Lord determines our steps, do whatever. No, it's nonsense. That's not what that means. But there is a sense that every single day, there's a moment where God is inviting us to worship Him by saying, God, I don't really know what this might mean. And in humility, are there people in my life that are going to teach me something that I don't understand? Are they going to show me something about how to be a dad or how to be a better husband or how to learn how to love other people that I don't know? This is one of the unique ways that we learn to worship. The next one, you can go to the promises again. Just go to the promises. Back to the promises. Here we go. The next one is this powerful moment where they gathered together to break bread. We do this at communion, but they actually did it in a meal, where they ate a meal together, as a reminder that God had promised provision for their daily needs. That a rich person would help and they would give to a poor person, and a person who had a farm and a person who didn't have a farm would have crops and help another person. There was the sense that as they worshiped God, they were content with enough, so that they had enough to help others. They had enough to give back to others. It's this beautiful moment in the Bible where worship is realizing that contentment will never come from stuff. Never. It'll never come from the things that we make, the things that we work for, a bigger house. It doesn't come from any of those things. What it means to worship Jesus is to really, really believe that. Now, there's been times in my life when I had the privilege of pastoring different churches, and one of the most difficult times in my life of learning how to be a pastor was when I was pastoring university students. I was the university chaplain pastor at a campus in Waterloo, a beautiful university, and we were with students all the time, and I often talked about what it meant to learn how to worship with students. And what's really, really interesting is when you talk to students, you're talking to most people who are poor. Like, they have no money, although they can buy a Starbucks coffee that costs $8, but they in a sense, they feel the weight of student debt and the pressures of life, and will they get a job and all this stuff. And I remember how important it was for them to understand that learning about being content with what you have has nothing to do with whether you're rich or whether you're poor. It has nothing to do with that. You actually have to learn it before any of those. And I've had students 10 years later, and this is always shocking to me and encouraging in the same way. Students who will send me an email and say, Dom, we still remember when you talked to us about learning to have contentment in who God is, not in the things we were going to have. Now, some of these students, by the way, now work for Google and Apple and are engineers all around the world, and they're millionaires. But in a sense, it was so important for us to learn that before we had anything. Before we got money or before we were seen differently because of our money. We learned how to be content because we were learning to worship Jesus first. The apostles' teaching, this sacred fellowship where we need each other and we want to be learning with each other. Where we learn to provide, the promise that God's going to provide what we need together and where we're going. And the last one is the sacred moment where they're learning how to pray. And I want to kind of end with this one. The promise of God's presence, not just any God, but the God who raised Jesus from the dead. They're praying for the first time in a way where they're not just calling on God, like in the Hebrew Bible where God, hope you help me, but God in the name of Jesus. This is something we always take for granted. And I've said this before, because when we pray, we just pray and we say in the name of Jesus. And if you're new to church, you might be really confused. You're like, why do you guys always end your prayers like that? That you should be confused. Because everybody in the Bible would have been confused. As they started to pray now, not just to some generic God in the sky, hoping that he listened, but they were starting to pray in such a way where the Father of Jesus, through what Jesus did, was available to them in their lives. Did you pray this week? Think about if you stopped to pray this week. If you said no, this is an area that God will most likely need to get your attention on. Because in those quiet times with God where we slow down to pray, in the name of Jesus, our worship, we learn how to worship. We learn how our lives get oriented, not around just what we see or what we feel in the day, but the promise of God's presence with us in certain moments where we don't have the right words, we don't know what to say, and we feel overwhelmed. And I'm just to share something personal. Is this past week I had a chance to visit a family member who's in the hospital, and I was with them, and the doctors are doing their best to figure out how to help, and they're not getting 100% better, but they're improving. And while I was with them, somebody in the ward where we were was just yelling in the background. This person just yelling. And for a moment I was like, I'm losing it. Like, why isn't, like, the human part of me was like, why doesn't someone help that person? Like, why doesn't somebody fix this? We pay so much tax dollars. Why is this so, constant? And then I had this moment where God says, just pray and be quiet. And I quietly said, God, I have no idea what that person's going through. I don't think the doctors know what that person's going through. I think everybody's trying to help. But they're going to need a sense of presence now. And I don't know if they believe in you. I don't know who they are. I just hear them yelling. It was a moment this week that God was trying to teach me, hey, are you aware of my presence with you wherever you are? Are you aware in those moments when you're angry and frustrated and remind yourself that somehow this world really is about you? That in prayer, God reminds you that this world is really not about you. Because when you think the world is just about you, you're no longer worshiping Jesus, you're worshiping you. And to be a follower of Jesus and to learn how to let our lives get oriented and shaped by who Jesus is, we need to learn and help with worship. These 4 things become the primary characteristics that will shape everything that the church has been and will continue to be. It'll shape who we are, how we think, how we learn, how we practice living with one another, how we worship Jesus. That's why it's so important when we get together to sing and to laugh and to break bread. And I'm just going to go to the next verse and I'm going to close with a prayer. Just go to the next verse. You'll see it. All the believers who are doing these 4 things, they're experiencing these promises. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. They took this so seriously that they started giving all the stuff away that they thought was going to make them happy. That now they're like, we don't even need that stuff. Who needs help? How can we give? How can we serve? What can we do? They started their inside out started to change. They began to get more generous. And to this day, we still have records of one of the most shocking things that the ancient Roman emperors and the Roman leaders at the time were so confused about this when they saw Christians. In ancient Rome, there was these practices that the emperor and the Romans were really, really good at. When people were hungry and there was parts of the population that were starving, the emperors would often send governors and leaders there to feed the people. And maybe you've seen movies where they do this, where they throw bread at the people and they throw drinks at the people. I was going to say like juice boxes, but they didn't have those. But they just throw stuff. Because in the ancient world, if you kept the people happy, you often stayed emperor for a long time. You just did this all the time. But there were times where people who were around in communities, they didn't have enough, or they were poor, they were struggling, and Christians would find out. And because they were learning to love each other and worship Jesus and give of themselves, they would start to go to these places and say, hey, we can help you. We can help you. You need help with your kids? You need help with your family? You need a meal? You need a place to sleep? Hospitality? Jesus, they'd invite people in. And we have writings to this day, thousands of years later, where governors and leaders in the ancient Roman Empire write and say, why are Christians doing the things that we were used to doing? Because they were learning how to worship. They were learning how to worship Jesus as the center of their lives. This week, starting tonight, you are going to make certain sacrifices as you look at your week and decide what's going to be a priority. You're going to make sacrifices and I'm going to make sacrifices. We all will. Whatever you consistently sacrifice for is the thing that you worship. That's just the way we are and the way God made us. And God is inviting all of us to say that we have to together learn how to worship who Jesus really, really is. And when we do this, when we step into this promise, when we realize now what, if we're going to say yes to Jesus, we got to do this, 4 promises are available to us. 4 promises of seeing God at work, trusting God in new ways, seeing Him use us and use me, and to help us to realize, wow, this is amazing. I would have never thought this was possible in me. And trust me, there's days I still don't think it's possible how God uses me. I'm like, how is this possible? God's like, just shut up. Just trust me. I have promises and stores for you that you haven't even seen yet. Just trust me. In your now what? Just take this step. I'm going to close with a story. This is because of my son yesterday. I was doing this with him, and I'm going to just pray, and we're going to head out because we're done for time. Is that yesterday I was trying to teach our youngest son how to ride a bike, okay? And if you've ever tried to teach someone how to ride a bike, you hope it's easy. You're giving them instructions, and my son kept saying to me, Dad, am I going to fall? 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 I'm like, I'm going to push you on the floor. Yeah, you're going to fall. Yeah, it's constant, right? You're trying. You're like, no, don't worry. And every time he put his feet up on the pedals, he would feel his weight of his body fall, and he'd be like, Dad, I'm going to fall. And I'm like, listen, bud, you're going to have to trust that if you just take this step now, you're going to experience what it's like to ride your bike. You're going to learn that, and you're going to have to be okay with the fear of what comes next. Now, I said it in a way that he can understand. If I would have said it that way, I'd been like, Dad, what? But I just said, just trust me, okay? So I held him, then I let go a bit, and he's like, I almost fell. At one point, he stopped. He's like, are you trying to make me fall? What is wrong with you? It's your mother's genes. It's your mother's genes. Okay, so, and I love you. She'll listen later. But, we're doing it, and at one point, like I'm running with him and I'm dying, and if you've ever tried to teach someone how to ride their bike, you have a window of how much you can run next to them. All my neighbors are like, it's so cute. I'm like, no, I look like an idiot. It's not cute at all. Who runs like this? Like, it's ridiculous. So, like, I'm running and I'm helping and we're almost there. And at one point, I'm like, bud, keep looking ahead over there, look. And I let go and he's going and he's doing it alone. And I was like, he goes, did I do that alone? I'm like, yeah, you did it all by yourself. I said, you see what happens when you trust that something is waiting for you on the other side that you're afraid of and you don't see yet? You see? He's like, really? You didn't help me? I'm like, no, try it now. And he did it again. Now, he's not perfect. He's learning. But I had a moment where so many times in my life, God was saying, do you know how many promises are in store for the things that I have for you? Like when you first start to ride your bike, if you feel like you could fly, you're like, what? This is amazing. I'm like, I told you. Just trust me. And I did that with him, and I was studying, and I was praying, and I thought, God, how many times in my life have you been trying to say to me, I have all of these things waiting for you. You're just going to have to trust me. I know you feel off balance. I know you're in a now what moment, and you're like, what do we get? And he's like, I'm there. Remember, I've made promises to you about what it means to worship me and what it means to trust me, and I'm going to be there. And you might feel like you're banged up. You might feel like you're not sure how this is going to look. But when you experience that feeling of my presence there, it changes everything. And in that moment, you're learning how to worship me. That's what happens. So I'm going to have a stand. I'm going to pray for us. And we're going to be done. And we hate to do this at the church where we rush people off, but in a sense, you're going to feel like we're rushing you off today just because a race is starting. And I want to remind you that one of the things that they did in the Bible is they broke bread together. I don't have to say it again. Sign up for the potluck. Right? We're going to eat together. We're going to laugh together. We're going to learn how to worship together. Right? As we hear each other's stories. But as you go, just be careful as you drive off. They're going to probably direct you about how to get out of this area so that nobody's hurt. And stay connected with us online, things going on this week. But we're going to encourage you, especially if you have small kids, to just go upstairs and grab them and get moving out so that we can follow the guidelines. Okay, let's just pray. Let's pray. Jesus, we're so thankful that you're still at work teaching us how to worship you. That by your Spirit, you're still revealing to us the promises that are available for those of us who put you at the center of our lives. For some of us, this is hard work. We're still trying, and we fail so many times. But we thank you for this space and this gathering and the way that we get to celebrate again together what your followers have been doing for thousands of years, to learn to trust you and to learn to sacrifice first and foremost for who you are. And as we go now, we pray that you would give us moments this week where we understand humility in a deeper way, where we understand what it means to trust you in a deeper way. Keep us attentive to your Spirit's leading so that we would be transformed and that we would say that you're teaching us how to worship you better each day. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen.